Okay.
Okay. The Civil Rights Movement. I wasn't really directly involved in the movement per se. I was much more involved in the anti-war movement. That was just more significant where I was, and, during the time when I would be protesting or whatever. I think there was one, this is really bad, I think there was one African American, I know there's one African American girl in my high school graduating class, and I never really thought about race, but I was never around any African Americans, I hung out with white people, all my activities were involving white people, so I just never thought much about it. I remember one time when I was younger, and this obviously really stands out, and I think it served to, it made a really big impression on me. We were going somewhere, our family, my mom and dad, and my brother and I was in the back seat asleep. It must not have been my mom and dad, it must have been my dad and a friend or something. And my dad told a joke and used the N-word in the joke, and I don't think I'd ever heard that word, but I knew in my gut when I heard it that wasn't right, and I was so shocked to hear my father say it, because he was a really neat person, and I'd never seen anything like prejudice or anything in my home. Of course, we'd never really been around black people, but I never felt anything like that. And I also remember growing up when people started sitting in and equal rights for all people was starting to come out. My mother always told me, in the South, white people don't care how close black people become to them as long as they don't get too high up. In other words, they used black women for nannies and stuff, but they didn't want them to be employed above them. And in the North, where my mother was from, she said white people didn't care how high up black people got as long as they didn't get too close. So my mother's from the North, my father was from Kentucky, which is really the South. So all these things just kind of, I guess, settled in my brain. And then when I got to college, I began to recognize more of what was going on and read the papers and realize that things were not the way they should be. And part of that was through I was in a choral speaking group called Word Masters, and the director of that was very in tune with all kinds of equal rights, and this was in 1967, 68, 69, so it was way before a lot of things were talked about. But anyway, one of the projects I did for a class I had at Georgetown, we had to, I don't know which class it was, whether it was the directing class or an acting class, but we had to do something and do it in the community, in the environment where it would really happen. So I chose a novel which was new. I think it was published in about 1968, called Man-Child and the Promised Land, and it was a memoir of an African-American young man, and all the stuff he was going through. And it was a very powerful novel, kind of, popular at that time. Still a really good novel, and highly recommended if you want to understand the black experience in the 60s. But anyway, there was a sermon in there, delivered by a black preacher. So my project was, secured a black church and made arrangements and went down to the church with my class and delivered the sermon from the pulpit. So it gave me an opportunity to really try it, because I was very, naive and sheltered growing up, and lots of love in my family, and I never thought about people not having love or not, caring for each other. So that, and then this other exercise that I mentioned at the diversity rally last week, where I think we were either freshmen or sophomores in college, and this African-American woman and I were friends, Carolyn Davis was her name, and we spent some time together and did a little performance exercise. I'm overusing that word, but anyway, for a group of people. I think it was with the church. I took on her persona and she took on mine. So we talked a little bit about our lives, and then people from the audience asked us questions. So really thinking about, that Atticus Finch and To Kill a Mockingbird said, you can't really ever know, you can't ever really judge another person until you've walked in their shoes. And it sounds a little trite, but it's really true, until you've really put on their shoes and know what their day is like. So that was just a wonderful experience for me.
What did you learn from it?
Well, I learned that my life was at that time and still is a hell of a lot easier than people of color. And I know we've come a long way, but I also know that an exercise that we did with the diversity team coalition just, in the last 4 years showed me that some dear friends I have now who are African American have a different experience in life. They have all experienced going into a store and having somebody watch them or follow them around. And I don't think I've ever experienced that. But so I learned that. I learned a lot about her personally, too, that maybe didn't have a lot to do with color. She was involved in a relationship that was abusive, and that was not comfortable. And then I guess the other, of course, I remember when the bombing of the Birmingham church and the little girls were killed, and that just was devastating news. And I also remember very clearly when it was announced on the radio that Martin Luther King had been killed. I was driving from Georgetown to Lexington with a friend of mine. I can't remember who it was, but we heard it on the radio, and we actually had to pull over and just let it sink in, because John F. Kennedy had been killed, I guess, in 1963, and I don't know, what year was Martin Luther King killed, Russell? 68? 68.
Same year as Bobby
And
Kennedy.
then Bobby Kennedy, yeah, the same year. So it was just a lot to take. So, and personally in my life, I never can remember feeling. Oh, I'll tell you one other really good experience that I had. And this was, I don't guess I should really say who it is, because in a roundabout way some people, it was a former relative of mine, and this was in 1971, and we were having a conversation. So it was two couples, and the other couple believed that black people were inferior. They really believed that black people were inferior. And we're having this conversation, saying, how can you even feel that way, yada, yada, yada. And the other couple went and got a book and said, look, in this book, it says here, black people have smaller brains than white people. And it was in the book. It was in the book. So there was a time, and that was in 1971, and that sounds like a long time ago to you, but I was, like 24 years old, and I just was astounded that it was actually in print. So,
did you ever have any prejudices before that you had grown out of, honestly?
I wonder about that, Carly. I think I can't remember feeling prejudices, but I know that when I was growing up, there were a lot of people who didn't like Japanese people because of, the war with Japan, and we are of German heritage, and I always felt really uncomfortable with that because of, Hitler and all that. I can't really. I must have, but I don't.